Hello everyone and welcome to Autistic Changeling. Today I'm going to talk about special interests. So special interests, I think, are something that most autistics are at least familiar with the concept of, but there's also a lot of misconception. There are a lot of stereotypes around special interests, and I want to kind of get through some of those. So special interests are interests that autistic people have and are generally stronger, more intense than the way allistic people experience interests. And there's a lot of diversity in the way autistics experience special interests, and I'm going to get into some of that later. But I think first let's talk about some of the stereotypes surrounding special interests. I think when most people think of special interests, they kind of picture the autistic character on television who's had like the same special interest for their entire life, and it's probably in a STEM field, and they're probably really good at it, and it's probably their job. And that's kind of, I think, some of the main stereotypes. So let's break that down a little. So first of all, the one special interest. Autistic people can actually have more than one special interest. It's not like every autistic person has exactly one special interest for their entire lifetime. And maybe some people do. I'm sure there's some autistic people out there who have had just one special interest their entire life, and that's fine, but that's not all there is. A lot of autistic people have had multiple special interests, and this can manifest in a lot of different ways. Some people maybe do only have one interest at a time, but maybe they had some interests when they were a kid and then it switched when they got older and learned about new things, or maybe some people do have multiple interests at a time, or maybe it's like me where my interests kind of switch out on like a weekly, every like 2 weeks to a month my interest kind of switches, but it's all from the same pool of interests, and I'm going to talk about this later. I have an entire metaphor. But so there's a lot of different ways that special interests can look, and you can have more than one special interest over the course of your lifetime, and special interests can change from time to time as well. So that's the first thing. Also, I feel like this should be a given, but because it is such a stereotype, I do want to point out that special interests do not have to be in a STEM field. I know trains are also a really common stereotype. I don't know anybody with a special interest in trains. I'm sure there's somebody out there who has a special interest in trains, but it's not nearly as common as the media likes to make it seem. For some reason, ancient Egypt seems to be a really common special interest, or maybe that's just me and a couple of people online. I don't know. But ancient Egypt is actually like almost more of a common special interest. And there is no thing that everybody has a special interest in. People are different, and people's interests are different, and autistic people are no exception to that. We're going to be interested in different things. And special interests don't have to be things that are really niche or obscure, or things that no neurotypical could be interested in. Autistic people can have special interests in things that neurotypicals also like. What differentiates it from the way a neurotypical person is interested isn't just the fact that we're interested in a certain topic. It's the fact that the way we engage with our interests and the way we feel them and the way other people think about our interests are affected by the fact that we're autistic. And that's sort of the differentiator here, is that we engage with our interests in autistic ways. Not so much that because we're interested in this thing that no neurotypical person could ever like, it's a special interest. I mean, neurotypicals can have weird interests too. It's not like that's just an autistic thing. But autistic people can also have special interests in pop culture, in common video games. It can be the more obscure niche interests, but that's not all there is either. So those are, I think, the two main stereotypes that I really wanted to get into, but also skill levels. You don't have to be really good at the thing your special interest is. You can have a special interest in a video game you suck at. You can have a special interest in a topic that you don't really know everything about. The reason that this is a stereotype, and something that is true for maybe a lot of autistic people, although certainly not all or even most, is because, if you do have a special interest that lasts for a long period of time and is consistent, then, you're going to want to learn about it, you're going to want to do it, you're going to want to engage with it, and the ways in which autistic people engage in special interests might lead to them developing a lot of skill or a lot of knowledge about the topic. It's not that having the special interest magically makes you good at it. If your special interest is a scientific field and you engage with that interest by learning about the field, then you're going to learn a lot about it, and that'll make you more knowledgeable about the field, which is probably where the stereotype comes from. But on the other hand, if your special interest is a video game and you just don't have the hand-eye coordination to be good at the video game, then you might maybe pick up a lot of knowledge about how the game works if you really like watching Let's Plays of it, for example, or you might learn about all the little hidden things in the game if that's what you're really interested in. But if your hand-eye coordination sucks, no amount of special interesting is going to make you magically good at the game. This might be a little bit from experience. I'm not very good at video games, but I try. So, special interest doesn't magically make you good at something. It makes you work at the thing because you enjoy the thing. But people get good at things by doing them, regardless of whether or not they're autistic. So those are the stereotypes that I wanted to kind of break down. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how I experience special interests, because I said earlier that I was going to do that. So I'm doing that now. So I think of special interests for me, and I do want to point out this is just how I experience special interests, not how everyone does, because as I said, everyone experiences special interests differently. There's a lot of variety. Autistic people are different from each other, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think of my special interests as sort of all residing in a pool of possible interests, and this consists of all the things that I frequently have interests in. And then they'll come to the forefront and be my main interest and what I'm really focused on, and what's my main active special interest for between a couple of weeks to a month before they switch out again. And it's the same handful of potential interests that do this for me. So I think the two main special interests that I have, and I've had since high school-ish, are Star Trek and Doctor Who, which are both fandoms. And a lot of my interests are in fandoms, personally. So for me, that means that, those are the two long-term interests that, no matter what, engaging with them makes me happy, even if they weren't, the forefront of my mind, before, even if I'd been interested in something else. Seeing them will make me happy. It feels comfortable and familiar, sort of like an anchor, I guess. It's just something that feels very integral to me, and those are the long-term interests that I can always rely on and depend on, and those will sometimes be at the forefront of my mind, I want to engage with them right now all the time, thinking about them, sort of the baseline thing that you come back to. When something's an active special interest for me, it's what I'm thinking about, when I'm doing other things in my day. Maybe I'll be thinking about what I want to do that involves my special interest later, that kind of a thing. No, I'm going to talk about that later. So, yeah, so when I have an active special interest, it's something that I always come back to in my mind that's sort of the baseline thing that I'm doing right now. And, Doctor Who and Star Trek, my two, main special interests, aren't always at that forefront. But when I see them, even if they weren't at the forefront, then I can, depend on them, and it's just a different feeling, I guess. So I do have other special interests than just those two main ones. So those are the two long-term interests. So then there's also some special interests that I think of as more short-term, and they might come up and be at the forefront of my mind. But when they're not at the forefront, I might see them and be happy, but there's not the same level of background intensity as there is with my two main interests. But it's still more than with things that never come to the forefront as a special interest, and I'm going to talk about regular interests later as well. So those other short-term interests are just other fandoms, stuff like Marvel. There's one that's really specific too. It's sometimes as the forefront of my special interest, I'll get specifically Magic Reveal Merlin fanfiction, despite the fact that I have not watched the actual show and have no desire to watch the show. The special interest specifically is just that type of fanfiction. So special interest can be weirdly niche sometimes. And then Marvel, on the other hand, is just comics, movies, like whatever, it's fine. I haven't read the comics, but still. Fan fiction is like the main way I engage with my interests, but there's a lot of other ways people can do that as well. So, normal interests. I do sometimes have, not sometimes, I do have interests that are not special interests. And these are just, TV shows that you watched, a movie you like, a game you might play, things that you like, but which have never really been a special interest. So, using more examples, Civilization. That's a game I like. I play it sometimes with my family or on my own. I like it, but it's never been a special interest. There's not the same level of intensity with interests that are not special interests. I don't know, this is hard to explain, I guess, because, it's very subjective to me, but there is a difference. I guess it's not, my brain doesn't keep coming back to it for the most part. It's not something that feels like a baseline thing. It's hard to explain, but suffice to say, autistic people can have interests that are not their special interest. Alright, moving on. Don't remember what I was going to talk about next. We'll figure it out. So that's one thing. What else was I going to talk about? Ways of engaging with your special interest. Let's do that. So, there's a lot of different ways that people can engage with special interests. You can want to learn everything there is about it. I know that some people like to hoard and organize information, and some people like to practice the thing a lot. Info dumping, that's what I was going to talk about. We'll do that too. So, ways of engaging with your special interests. There's a lot of them, and I think people tend to engage with their special interests in multiple ways. I like to learn about things that I'm interested in, and I do like to collect and organize information, but I usually start a project where I'm going to do that and then realize it's too much work and stop. And then I just don't do it, don't finish it. But that leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about with regards to this, which is that when your interests switch out kind of frequently, it actually gets kind of frustrating. If my interests only last between 2 weeks to a month, then because it's my interest at the time, I feel like I'm going to be interested in it forever, and I'll start coming up all these plans, all these things I want to do, ways I want to engage with it. It'll be what I'm thinking about, and then a different interest will take over before I have the chance to actually implement any of that, which is slightly frustrating, but on the other hand, I love all the things I'm interested in, and that's just how it is, but that's kind of funny. So, info dumping. That's another way that people can engage with their special interests, is by talking to other people about them and by sharing that information. And I think, for me at least, I don't know about everybody else, but for me this is also one of the ways in which I bond with people. I think in general autistic people, and I say in general, but I don't know for sure, but I think for me at least, info dumping is a way to bond with people, to share the things that I'm interested in, and other autistic people info dumping to you is a way for them to share, and it's just how people bond. And I think this is how neurotypicals do it too, just without special interests. I'm pretty sure that sharing interests with other people is just sort of a fundamental way humans connect with each other. But this does lead to some complications with neurotypicals, because I'll be trying to share the things that I'm interested about, but Aulistics don't often have good reactions to info dumping. It's kind of stigmatized. The way that autistic people engage with and share our interests is pathologized compared to the ways in which non-autistic people do those things. If somebody isn't autistic and they have a strong interest in something, they're allowed to talk about it, and it'll just be seen as, oh look, they're passionate about the thing they like. But if an autistic person does it, then it's a problem behavior and it needs to be stopped. And this is sort of a really frustrating thing that happens, and it does discourage autistic people from info dumping, I think. Or, if the person can't help it, then they might feel guilty about it afterwards. And it makes it harder to bond with people if the way you share your interests is stigmatized. So that's a really important thing I think people need to be aware of. And, I think also in Aulistics, if someone does have an interest that's strong enough that it gets more similar to how autistic people experience our interests, then that does start to get stigmatized, and I think people are more likely to mock neurotypicals for their interests if those interests are more similar to how autistic people experience them, because that ableism gets misdirected. So yeah, don't make fun of people for being interested in things to a strong extent. And I also want to compare this to how people tend to talk about nerds and geeks and cultural stuff like that as well, because having strong interests and maybe more autistic ways of interacting with them are things that tend to get associated with those terms. And then by extension, when people are mocking those things, they're actually also mocking the ways autistic people interact with our interests because of that connection that has been made. So I think that's kind of most of what I wanted to talk about. If you liked this video, please remember to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, things you want to talk about, feel free to leave them below in the comments section. And I hope you have a great day.